It is 3:12 in the morning on a Thursday in late October. 90 miles southwest of Key West, the water is flat and black. No moon. The only sound is the low idle of a US Coast Guard cutter holding position in the dark. Running lights dimmed, crew at full readiness. On the bridge, a radio crackles once. A single authentication code, and goes quiet. Below, on the main deck, 6 DEA special agents in black tactical gear do a final check. Bolt cutters, pry bars, atmospheric sensor, chemical test kits. Each agent wears a personal flotation device over their vest. They have been awake for 19 hours. 400 meters to the southwest, barely visible against the water. Something sits low, very low, almost flush with the surface. A blunt grey shape, maybe 18 meters long. No navigation lights, no visible crew. Moving at roughly 4 knots on a northeast heading, running shallow, its fiberglass hull riding with less than 60 centimeters of freeboard above the waterline. A narco-submarine, a low-profile semi-submersible, custom-built, running dark. The order comes at 3:14 a.m. 2 rigid-hull inflatable boats drop from the cutter's davits and hit the water simultaneously. 12 personnel, 6 DEA, 6 Coast Guard interdiction specialists, close the distance in under 3 minutes. The semi-submersible's crew, 4 individuals, don't attempt to maneuver. They know the cutter's radar had them long before they knew they were seen. At 3:17 a.m., the first USCG officer reaches the hatch on the vessel's port topside and hammers it twice with a gloved fist. Federal agents, stop engines. Hands up, stop engines. The hatch opens from inside. What agents find when they cut through the sealed inner hull will take 2 days to fully catalogue. But the number that matters, the number that ends an 11-month investigation, comes through on a satellite radio at 4:51 a.m., when the first DEA evidence technician finishes a preliminary count and transmits it back to the command post in Miami. 8.1 tons, 8.1 metric tons of cocaine, wrapped in fiberglass sealed bricks, stacked floor to ceiling in 3 separate compartments, worth, at wholesale, somewhere north of $240 million. And all of it, every brick, every kilo, the vessel itself, the 4 crew now in flex cuffs on the cutter's deck, and the 39 individuals who will be indicted by a federal grand jury within the next 72 hours. All of it traces back to a spreadsheet. A marina fuel log, 3 identical rows that nobody was supposed to notice. This is how it happened. In the summer of the previous year, a DEA financial crimes analyst based in the Miami Field Division was doing what financial crimes analysts do on a slow Tuesday afternoon. Cross-referencing fuel purchase records submitted by commercial marine operators against Florida Department of Environmental Protection marina logs. Routine work. Most of it is exactly what it looks like. One file was not. The file belonged to a charter fishing company operating out of a small marina on the southern end of Biscayne Bay. The company was registered in the name of a Florida LLC, showed a modest fleet, 3 vessels, all properly titled, and had filed the correct fuel tax exemption paperwork. On paper, unremarkable. But the analyst was looking at the fuel purchase column, and something was wrong. Row 14, 847 gallons, timestamp 0623. Row 21, 1 week later, 847 gallons, timestamp 0623. Row 28, 1 week after that, 847 gallons, timestamp 0623. Same gallon count, same timestamp, down to the minute, 3 weeks running. I spent time going through the methodology on this, the way financial analysts are trained to flag anomalies in high-volume record sets, and this is the kind of error that gets missed constantly because it looks, at a glance, like normal business repetition. A regular customer, a regular fill-up. The human eye skips it. What the analyst recognized, and this is the detail that built the entire case, was that a real vessel refueling at a real marina does not produce identical timestamps across 3 separate weeks. Pump meters don't work that way. Even the same boat, same captain, same day of the week, fills to a different gallon count based on how much was burned on the prior run. 847 gallons, to the gallon, 3 times in a row, at 6:23 in the morning, 3 weeks apart. Someone had copy-pasted the row. The analyst flagged it. She wrote 4 sentences in an internal memo and sent it up the chain. Within 48 hours, a DEA group supervisor in the Miami division had assigned 2 agents to take a preliminary look. What they found when they looked was not a small discrepancy. It was the edge of something much larger. The charter company, which we'll call Coastal Current Marine in this reconstruction, had been operating for 3 years. Legitimate revenue on paper, reef fishing charters, corporate deep-sea outings, occasional vessel delivery contracts. Nothing that would attract attention. The LLC was clean. The 3 titled vessels were properly registered. Insurance was current, but a financial subpoena on the LLC's bank accounts, issued under seal by a federal magistrate judge in the Southern District of Florida, showed something that did not match the revenue picture. Over an 18-month period, Coastal Current Marine had processed approximately $4.2 million in receipts, an extremely high number for a 3-boat charter operation in its market segment. The deposits came in irregular amounts, rarely round numbers, from at least 9 different source accounts, several of them registered to other marine LLCs. The DEA Group supervisor brought in a second analyst, this time from the Financial Intelligence Unit, and together they began mapping the corporate structure. What they found over the following 6 weeks was a layered network of 14 vessel title shell companies, LLCs registered in Florida, Delaware, and Georgia, all interconnected through a web of nominee owners and management agreements. None of the shells appeared to hold real assets. Most had never filed a tax return, but money moved through them continuously, in amounts that correlated, when the analysts ran the numbers against DEA maritime drug pricing databases, with the wholesale value of multi-hundred-kilogram cocaine consignments, $148 million. That was the estimate of total laundered proceeds flowing through this network over the prior 24 months. The DEA Miami Field Division formally opened a Title III wire investigation in the 3rd week of October, 11 months before the morning on the water. The operation was assigned a code name internally. For this reconstruction, we will call it Operation Shoal Watch. The first wire went up on the charter company's main dispatch phone within 30 days of the investigation opening. Getting there required a 47-page affidavit filed under seal, a presentation to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami, and a federal judge's authorization, a process that took 11 days from application to approval. The dispatcher, a man in his late 40s who handled all vessel scheduling, crew assignments, and fuel coordination for Coastal Current Marine, became the focal point of the early phase. His calls were routine on the surface, but over the first 3 weeks of the wire, the DEA intercepted 42 calls that used language patterns consistent with coded maritime coordination, references to fishing locations that didn't correspond to actual reef systems, references to fuel status at times of day when no vessel was logged as active, references to passenger counts on runs that had no charter booking in the system. One call, intercepted at 11:14 p.m. on a Wednesday, lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The dispatcher spoke with an unidentified male using what appeared to be a pre-arranged numerical code keyed to compass headings and distance markers. The DEA analyst who reviewed the transcript circled one exchange and wrote in the margin, staging coordinates. But here is where the investigation almost stalled before it really started. The dispatcher used 3 different phones, a personal cell, a business line, and a prepaid device he swapped every 2 weeks. The wire covered the business line and, after a second court authorization, the personal cell. But the prepaid phone was a problem. Every time he switched devices, the wire team lost him for 48 to 72 hours while they worked to identify the new number. On the 3rd swap, in the 2nd month of the wire, the new number didn't surface at all. For 11 days, the primary intercept went dark. The supervisor made a call that would prove critical. Rather than wait, the team shifted focus to the physical surveillance element. A DEA surveillance unit had been watching the marina intermittently since the investigation opened. During the 11 days the wire was dark, they moved to intensive around-the-clock coverage. And on the 8th night, at 2:40 in the morning, they observed something. One of Coastal Current Marine's vessels, a 44-foot sport fishing boat, registered as the Meridian Sky, departed the marina without filing a trip plan, without AIS transponder signal, running without its standard navigation lights. It headed south into Biscayne Bay and was picked up by a Coast Guard surveillance asset 20 minutes later, running at speed toward the Florida Strait. The vessel returned at 6:17 a.m. It was logged back in at the marina. No fuel purchase was recorded. The surveillance team photographed the departure and return. They noted that when the Meridian Sky came back in, it sat approximately 4 to 6 inches higher in the water than when it left. Whatever it had been carrying out, it had offloaded. 6 weeks in, and the investigators had a wire on the dispatcher and evidence of nighttime vessel activity consistent with a maritime transfer operation. But they didn't yet have the other end, the source, the route, the staging point on the water. That came from satellite. DEA maritime investigations at this level routinely request support from federal assets capable of broad area maritime surveillance. In this case, the request went through GAF South, Joint Interagency Task Force South, based in Key West, the federal coordination body for counter-drug maritime operations in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. GAF South can task surveillance assets over wide ocean areas and correlate vessel movement data across multiple sensor types. Within 10 days of the request being approved, analysts had identified a pattern, a low-radar cross-section contact, consistent with a semi-submersible or low-profile vessel, was appearing intermittently at a location approximately 60 miles east of the Yucatan Channel, on a heading consistent with a northeastern transit toward the Straits of Florida. The contact appeared 6 times over a 3-week observation window. Each appearance was at night. Each transit was on a slightly different heading, but all converged on the same general approach corridor toward the southern tip of the Florida Keys. What the analysts needed was the staging cove, the intermediate stop where the Narco-Sub offloaded to smaller vessels like the Meridian Sky for the final delivery run into the marina network. They found it from the wire. On the 43rd day of the investigation, the dispatcher's business line, which had gone back into use after the prepaid phone gap, received a call that lasted 8 seconds. 8 seconds, from a number registered to a marine supply company in the Florida Keys. The call contained 3 words and a number, and then ended. The DEA analyst who reviewed it that night wrote a single line in the log, "This is the cove reference." Cross-referencing the number against nautical charts identified a small natural inlet on the ocean side of a chain of uninhabited mangrove islands south of Marathon, accessible by water and invisible from any paved road. The inlet had no commercial designation. It appeared on no marina registry. But when a DEA surveillance boat ran a passive pass through the area 2 nights later, they found mooring lines, heavy polyester lines, recently used, tied off to mangrove roots. And on one of the roots, a piece of grey fiberglass insulation foam, the type used in marine hull construction, caught in the bark. That was the staging cove. Now they needed someone inside. The undercover component of Operation Shoal Watch was built over approximately 6 weeks. The DEA's undercover program in the Southern District maintained a roster of experienced agents with credible maritime backgrounds, individuals who could pass scrutiny as working deckhands. The agent selected for this operation, referred to in court documents as UC7, had 12 years of experience and had previously worked undercover in 2 prior maritime investigations. UC7's cover identity was that of a freelance deckhand and vessel delivery contractor, with connections to a legitimate marine services company in Fort Lauderdale. His backstory was deep enough to survive basic vetting, a real work history at a real company, real references who were either cooperating individuals or other undercover personnel, a real commercial captain's license in his cover name. Getting UC7 into the coastal current marine orbit took 3 weeks. The approach came through a cooperating individual, a legitimate marina employee, who had been approached to facilitate vessel movements and had, instead, contacted law enforcement. The CI introduced UC7 as a reliable deckhand looking for night work. Reliable meant no questions, no phone. Show up, do the job, collect cash. Most people assume that undercover operations in drug cases hinge on dramatic moments. The moment the agent hands over money, the moment the wire captures the key admission. What's actually most surprising about this case isn't any single dramatic exchange. It's the sheer amount of ordinary, boring maritime labor UC7 performed before anyone trusted him with anything significant. 6 night launches, 6 round trips to the staging area, loading, securing, driving, returning, never asking where the cargo came from, never expressing curiosity about the bricks stacked under canvas tarps in the Meridian Sky's fish hold. He logged it all. GPS track from his personal device, concealed. Photographs taken with a sub-miniature camera integrated into a dive watch. Audio from a body wire on the 4th, 5th, and 6th runs. By the 6th run, he had enough on record to establish the full pattern. The Meridian Sky would depart the marina between 1:30 and 3 a.m. It would run south to the inlet, arriving in approximately 90 minutes. At the inlet, a second vessel, a rigid hull inflatable boat, crewed by 2 individuals, would be waiting. Transfer of cargo took between 25 and 40 minutes. Then the Meridian Sky would return north, arriving back at the marina before sunrise. On the sixth run, UC-7 observed something he hadn't seen on prior nights. Moored in the deeper water just outside the inlet, its hull awash, was the semi-submersible itself. Not a transfer vessel, the source vessel, offloading directly into the staging area. He transmitted his observation at 4:43 a.m. to the surveillance team running his cover. The DEA group supervisor, reviewing the transmission at 6 a.m. that morning, made a notation in the case file. Source vessel confirmed in corridor. Recommend transition to interdiction planning. 11 months of investigation was about to compress into a single operational window. There is a line in the case file, internal, not public, that reads almost like a procedural footnote, but carries the weight of everything the investigation had built. It was written by the case agent the week before the operation executed. All assets are in place. Window is weather dependent. Risk of compromise increases with each additional transit. That last sentence was the pressure point. By the time the interdiction was being planned, the investigation had been running for 10.5 months. UC-7 had completed 6 documented transits. The wire had been up continuously for 9 months, producing over 6,000 intercepted communications. Satellite surveillance had tracked the semi-submersible on 11 confirmed approaches. The landside network, the shell companies, the dispatcher, the marina employees involved in the operation had been fully mapped. Arrest packages had been prepared for 39 individuals across Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Federal warrants had been obtained for 5 staging sites, 3 in South Florida, 1 in coastal Georgia, 1 in the Charleston, South Carolina area. But the entire operation would collapse in value if the semi-submersible completed another transfer run and offloaded before it could be interdicted. Each additional run meant another multi-ton cocaine consignment successfully delivered into the distribution network. Each run also increased the risk that someone in the network, a crew member, a marina employee, anyone with visibility into the operation, would notice the surveillance and alert the organization. The week before the scheduled operation, there was a complication. The weather window that GIAT South had identified for the interdiction, a period of flat seas and low wind conditions, optimal for boarding operations, was closing. A late-season tropical disturbance had developed in the Western Caribbean and was tracking northeast. Not a hurricane, not even a named storm, but the outer bands were generating sea states above 4 feet in the Florida Strait, and the Coast Guard boarding team's protocol for semi-submersible interdiction required sea states below 3 feet. The window moved. What had been scheduled for a Tuesday night shifted, at 36 hours' notice, to the following Thursday. Every asset, every arrest team, every federal warrant needed to be held in position for an additional 48 hours. 39 arrest subjects, under continuous surveillance, could not be allowed to sense that anything had changed. The surveillance teams rotated. The wire teams stayed up. The Coast Guard cutter repositioned to a holding area outside the expected approach corridor. UC-7 was stood down. His last transit was complete, his role concluded. But he remained in contact with his handler 3 times a day. And then, at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, roughly 27 hours before the planned interdiction, the dispatcher's phone lit up with an incoming call. The call lasted 90 seconds. The DEA analyst monitoring the wire flagged it immediately and called the group supervisor. The semi-submersible was moving, ahead of schedule. The call from the dispatcher had gone to a number that the wire team had catalogued as a secondary coordination contact, a number they had intercepted before but never heard used for anything more than logistical confirmations. This call was different. The analyst who transcribed it wrote in the margin, "Vessel underway, ETA corridor 6 to 7 hours. It was not Thursday. It was Wednesday night. The vessel was 24 hours early. The group supervisor made 3 phone calls in the next 8 minutes. The first to the U.S. Attorney's duty line in Miami. The second to the GIAT South Watch Officer in Key West. The third to the Coast Guard Sector Commander. The question was simple, and the answer needed to come in under 30 minutes. Was the sea state in the Florida Strait inside protocol for a boarding operation? The Coast Guard meteorologist on watch ran the current buoy data. At the interdiction position, 90 miles southwest of Key West, wave height was running 2.4 feet. Wind at 11 knots, decreasing. Inside protocol. Barely, but inside. The call went out at 12:19 a.m. All elements execute. All elements execute. At the same moment, the interdiction teams were moving on the water. 37 federal agents and officers across 2 states were receiving the same signal through encrypted federal communications. Execute. 5 locations. Simultaneous entry. The first was a warehouse unit in the Hialeah Industrial Corridor, northwest of Miami, a registered marine parts and storage business that federal investigators had identified as the primary landside offload point for the distribution network. At 3:24 a.m., 10 minutes after the semi-submersible hatch opened 90 miles to the southwest, a DEA SWAT element in full tactical gear made entry through the primary roll door using a hydraulic ram. The door came down in under 4 seconds. 12 agents flowed in. 2 individuals inside were taken into custody without resistance. On the warehouse floor, arranged in palletized stacks under shrink wrap, additional drug inventory already in the distribution chain, along with packaging materials, currency counting equipment, and a commercial-grade vacuum sealer. The second location was a residential property in Kendall, a suburban house, 2 stories, quiet street. 3 agents in DEA jackets made a knock-and-announce entry at 3:26 a.m. The individual inside, a man in his mid-50s who was the primary financial coordinator for the shell company network, was taken into custody in his kitchen. He was still holding a coffee mug. He did not speak. The third location was the marina itself. A Coast Guard law enforcement detachment team, coordinating with the Biscayne Bay Marine Unit, staged at the marina dock at 3:15 a.m. and secured the Meridian Sky and the 2 other coastal current marine vessels at 3:31 a.m. The dispatcher, the man whose copied fuel log had started everything, was arrested at his residence 4 blocks from the marina at 3:44 a.m. He came to the door in a bathrobe. He looked at the badge. He said nothing. The 4th and 5th locations, in coastal Georgia and the Charleston, South Carolina area, were hit by HSI and DEA task force units coordinating with local law enforcement. Combined, those 2 locations yielded 3 additional individuals in custody and a significant quantity of additional evidence: financial records, additional shell company documentation, and 1 additional vehicle used in cash transportation runs. By 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 35 of the 39 indicted individuals were in federal custody. The remaining 4 were located and arrested within 72 hours. Here's the take that'll probably draw some pushback. The fact that it took 11 months and a full GRTF South satellite tasking to crack an operation that was running on a copy-pasted spreadsheet row says something uncomfortable about the baseline of document scrutiny in the commercial marine sector. This wasn't a sophisticated cover, it was a clerical error left standing because nobody was reading the second page of the fuel log. The DEA built a masterclass of an investigation from the moment they found that anomaly, but the anomaly should have surfaced months earlier through routine regulatory review that never happened. The maritime regulatory framework for small commercial operators in the United States has gaps wide enough to run a semi-submersible through, and the fact that it took a federal financial crimes analyst cross-referencing records on a Tuesday afternoon to find this particular one is not a success story. It's a near miss. Back on the water, at 3:17 a.m., the Coast Guard boarding team had the semi-submersible's hatch open and the 4 crew members on the cutter's deck. The vessel itself was a purpose-built fiberglass semi-submersible, approximately 18 meters in length. It had a crew compartment forward, a mechanical space amidships with a modified diesel engine and ballast system, and a cargo compartment aft that took up roughly 40% of the hull volume. The cargo compartment was sealed by an interior fiberglass bulkhead with a bolted access hatch. The DEA evidence technicians used power tools to remove the bolts. What was inside had been packed with precision. Rectangular bricks, each individually vacuum sealed in heavy polyethylene, then wrapped in a secondary fiberglass cloth layer designed to resist moisture and pressure. Each brick weighed approximately 1 kilogram. They were stacked floor to ceiling in 3 rows, secured with ratchet straps bolted to structural frames in the hull. The initial field count at 4:51 a.m. was confirmed by a full laboratory weight and count conducted over the following 36 hours at a secure DEA evidence facility in Miami. 8.1 metric tons. 8,122 individual kilograms. Confirmed by laboratory analysis as cocaine hydrochloride. Purity averaging 78%. At wholesale prices for the Miami distribution market, roughly $30,000 per kilogram, the consignment represented a gross value of approximately $243 million. At retail, multiples higher. It was the single largest maritime cocaine seizure in the Southern District of Florida in 4 years. What do you think? Did the maritime regulatory system fail here, or is this level of gap inevitable in a sector this large? Drop your answer in the comments. We read them. The federal grand jury in the Southern District of Florida returned a multi-count indictment naming 39 defendants within 72 hours of the arrests. The charges spanned conspiracy to import a controlled substance, conspiracy to commit money laundering, operating a drug-involved premises, and for several defendants, use of a semi-submersible vessel to transport controlled substances, a federal charge that carries a sentence enhancement on top of the underlying drug offense. Of the 39 indicted, 26 entered guilty pleas within the first 8 months. The remaining 13 proceeded toward trial, with the first trial date set in the federal courthouse in Miami. The sentences handed down to those who pled guilty ranged from 8 years to 22 years in federal prison, depending on each defendant's role and prior criminal history. The primary financial coordinator, the man arrested in his kitchen in Kendall, received 18 years following his plea, based on the scope of the money laundering operation he had administered. The dispatcher received 14 years. The 4 crew members of the semi-submersible, all foreign nationals, were prosecuted under the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act, which extends U.S. federal jurisdiction to vessels operating outside U.S. territorial waters when carrying controlled substances destined for the United States. Each received sentences between 10 and 15 years. The 14 vessel title shell companies were dissolved by court order. The 3 coastal current marine boats, including the Meridian Sky, were seized and forfeited. The warehouse in Hialeah was forfeited. Combined asset forfeiture in the case totaled approximately $11.3 million in property and accounts. The $148 million in estimated laundered proceeds was the subject of a separate civil forfeiture action targeting the shell company network. Recovery on that figure, the amount that could actually be traced and seized, was significantly lower, as is typical in money laundering cases where funds have already moved through multiple layers and jurisdictions. Interdictions on the Florida Strait Corridor had been rising in the 7 weeks before Operation Shoal Watch executed, as federal and military assets were deployed in increased numbers to the region. Operation Shoal Watch was one of several concurrent federal maritime investigations active in the same corridor during this period. Whether the increased interdiction pressure was driving the cartel network to accelerate its schedule, which may explain why the semi-submersible moved early, triggering the compressed timeline, is a question that investigators noted in post-operation assessments, but could not definitively answer. One detail that stuck with me, going through the case reconstruction, in the final evidence inventory, among the materials recovered from the financial coordinator's residence in Kendall, was a printed spreadsheet, not digital, printed, on paper, in a 3-ring binder. It was a master log of every fuel purchase record, submitted by every shell company in the network over a 24-month period. Row after row after row of marina fuel logs. And there, on page 7, visible without any analysis tools, without any database cross-referencing, without any special training, 3 consecutive rows. Same gallon count, same timestamp. A copy-paste error so obvious that the financial coordinator himself had circled it in pencil, with a note in the margin. The note said, "Fix before next filing." He never fixed it. We track what comes next. Subscribe to the Bureau files so the next case finds you first. Here is where Operation Shoal Watch leaves things. 39 individuals indicted, 8.1 tons off the market, 1 semi-submersible on the ocean floor of a federal evidence lot in Miami, 1 corridor disrupted, for now, and 1 question that the case file raises but does not answer. The DEA financial analyst who flagged that Fuel Log was doing a routine cross-reference on a Tuesday afternoon. She was not running a targeted investigation. She was not acting on a tip. She was reading a spreadsheet that crossed her desk as part of standard financial review work, and she read the second page. How many identical logs, same gallon count, same timestamp, week after week, are sitting in marina compliance files right now, waiting for someone to read the second page? Comment yes if you think there are more networks like this still running, and no if you think the current interdiction surge is closing the gap. We want to know where you stand. The network is dismantled. The semi-submersible is evidence. 39 people are facing federal prison time. And somewhere, right now, another spreadsheet is being filed.